Welcome everyone to Haven of Horror. I'm Subject. I've got my buddy Doolittle here, continuing our journey through the first four Friday the 13th films with part two. This is more or less a journey of showing Doolittle these films, at least the early ones,
Yeah.
since he has never seen them. As always, feel free to hit that subscribe button if you like the content and check out our Patreon. It will be linked down in the comment section below. So Doolittle, I'm gonna let you take the lead again, and just give us your first initial thoughts during the film.
Yeah, so I feel like this one was like a pretty noted improvement over the first one. Um, and it felt like surprisingly a bit more of a natural continuation in some ways. I wasn't expecting it to line up properly. But it kind of picks up somewhat like immediately after the first one and then continues on from that point. Um, and I, I think just kind of overall everything is kind of, I think slowly but surely things are coming into place. I feel like uh, by the next film things will probably be more what is expected of the series, but this is kind of laying down the foundations even more, which is nice. And I don't know, this to me feels kind of like what I would expect a teen slasher horror movie to kind of be like, which is cool. This kind of feels like the first like solidified like, oh, like this is what it is. And obviously like Halloween, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and the first Friday the 13th came before this, obviously. But I feel like this is kind of like we're kind of building on stuff more as we're going on with it. So it's cool to see the development of a genre throughout all of this, which is always the nice thing with stuff like this.
Absolutely. So you mentioned that it
Yeah.
lines up, and I agree for the most part. But my favorite thing about this is that this is 5 years after the first movie, and yet
Yeah.
Jason is somehow a grown man
Oh, well, that part doesn't line up.
now.
No, 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 no. I
So how
mean,
did you
I
feel
meant
about the double recap?
the double recap.
Yeah.
I don't know. I didn't really mind it because well, I don't know. It didn't stand out to me as being something too bad. I feel like it almost, this is gonna sound kind of weird. I almost feel like it added like a mythological element to Jason in a way. I don't know how to like really articulate that properly, but there's something kind of interesting about recapping it twice like that.
Okay, I could see that. I kind of agree with you, but it always makes me laugh that the survivor from the first movie has a nightmare that happens to last just long enough for the first movie's last 20 minutes to be recapped.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
since
for sure.
we're in the beginning, how did, and you had mentioned, you kind of hope that Alice comes back. Did you like what we did with her?
Yes, I thought that was I felt like that kind of made sense as like a way to kind of bridge the gap a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, Jason was polite enough to even take her tea kettle off the burner after
Yeah,
putting a nice pick in her head.
and well, can I also say that that whole sequence was pretty. It's interesting picking up on kind of cool filmmaking stuff with these movies because I'm not expecting that when I'm going into a Friday the 13th movie, but I like the way that the that sequence was constructed. I feel like that was pretty well done
Yeah,
overall.
and to note, this is directed by Steve Miner, who is most
Hmm.
noted for doing this, the next one, House, Halloween 20 years later. And the last movie he did that we covered was the remake of Day of the Dead, which was awful. Still very hit and
Oh,
miss, but he did direct some very big horror films back in the 80s and 90s. Um, and he worked, I believe, as like a production assistant on the first movie before getting to direct this one. So I'm
I
glad that you
see.
mentioned that because I was about to ask how you felt about the directing because you noticed things like that more than I do.
No, yeah, I feel like even just from the opening scene, there's like so like with the kid and the puddle, you go from his like legs and feet to then the killer's legs and feet. Like it's very well shot and well. There's a lot of consideration for the blocking and directing and creating a sense of tension, which is really cool. And again, did not expect that going into this, but it was nice to pick up on that nonetheless.
Absolutely. So the other
Yeah.
big thing that's missing from here, because like you said, that this very much is we're getting there, but we're not quite there yet, which I agree with. Is obviously Jason doesn't have the hockey moves.
No,
So how do you feel about the bag?
it's a little generic, for sure. Um, in some ways, obviously the hockey mask is way better and it's more iconic and kind of achieves this similar effect while still being distinct, which is good. But what I like about the bag is it allows for that anonymity so that you can kind of not project yourself onto him, but because that would be kind of weird. But so that like you can kind of quickly identify him. Um, it's that kind of simplicity in design. Where because like I feel like the whole appeal of Jason, the thing that makes him very different from Michael Myers and Freddy and well, Leatherface is just kind of like a muscle in that first movie. But the thing that kind of makes him different from a lot of the slasher villains is that he is a victim and he kind of is like a living metaphor for what it means to kind of be a victim. And I think that and the things that kind of triggers him, I feel like kind of elicit that as well. And I think that by having his design as simple as humanly possible, it kind of communicate that's pretty effectively that no, like this is a easily identifiable uh expression, you know, which I think is kind of a stroke of genius, intentional or not. You know.
I can definitely see that, and I agree to a certain point. It's funny because they talk about the bag in the that big documentary. I think I mentioned it last time we recorded. And one of and I can't confirm this because they weren't people who said this also weren't sure. But one of the reasons they changed it is it's like borderline ripping off The Town That Dreaded Sundown, which if
Oh,
you've
okay.
never seen is a very interesting slasher. But the killer in that looks almost identical to Jason in this.
Oh,
Um,
interesting. So,
Speaking of
okay.
things that they borrowed from, moving to the kills for a minute, did you? Because I know you've seen a few gallows now, or
Yeah.
giallos, whatever.
Yeah, Jaws.
Uh, the spear kill is lifted directly from, I believe it's in Brava film, the Bay of Blood, I believe,
Yeah, Mario
or
Bava's Bay of Blood. Yeah.
or one of those movies. But it's interesting to see that they've started pulling from, because obviously you can't really pull from Halloween again, because I don't think at this point Halloween 2 had come out yet. So it's interesting that they got somebody who had seen what Italy was doing with this genre and pulled from
Mhm.
that, even if they didn't change much.
Yeah. No, I mean it's definitely interesting that seeing how kind of the different art forms are communicating in that way and building off of each other. Even if it is perhaps a bit derivative here and there. Um, I think that the context in which it exudes strikes a very different kind of effect, in a way. I think the culture is kind of important to consider as well, because in Italy, the Giallos, uh, like they were very violent, and had a lot of like sexual stuff. But that was like they were pretty liberal about a lot of that stuff, whereas in America we're a bit more uh like we treat a lot of that stuff a lot more with like kid gloves, and like it's a very taboo thing. So I think it's kind of interesting to see that translated here and how much more of a bigger deal we make out of it, you know. I think that's kind of interesting.
Yeah. So with this being a, or no, sorry, it's not Bay of Blood. It's Twitch of the Death Move.
Yeah,
That's the movie.
I had a feeling it wasn't Bay of Blood, but I knew it was within that kind of universe. Yeah.
So I think the biggest improvement they make to this movie is the characters. None of them are very fleshed out, kind of the same as the first movie, but I think the actors make them more likable. Like, at least there's at least more I can remember more than just the main girl from this movie, which I
Oh
can't
yeah,
say about the first.
yeah. They have a bit more personality, and they are have kind of distinct kind of like quirks and traits about them that you can kind of latch onto and ground them a little bit more for what it is, obviously, because they're not the most developed characters in the world. But and you get a good kind of sense of the dynamics. Like you have the guy who's kind of being a jerk to that one girl, with the slingshot, and then you have like the other kind of relationships. You have the girl and the guy in the wheelchair, like there's like relationships and there's like interpersonal kind of dynamics, which again, not the most developed characters in the world, but it's enough for what it's trying to be and kind of delivering a concise slasher.
Absolutely. So speaking of
Yeah.
the wheelchair, am I an asshole that I laugh every time he dies? Like every time I watch this movie and I watch him, like, because he goes down an insane amount of stairs.
No, yeah, well, it's like it's just so exaggerated, you know. I think that's part of it.
So the big thing this movie's missing, launching off of the kills thing, is obviously Tom Savini did not come.
Hmm.
Do you feel like some of the gore, what's left after the MPA butchered these movies, is a step down from Savini's work, or is it close enough that it's harder to tell?
Um, I mean, it's a bit stepped down, but I still kind of was able to like notice it and notice the effects. I was more I thought it was kind of interesting. I think I'd mentioned this before, but I thought the methods that Jason used was a lot more interesting than the actual gore of it. It's interesting that he was a much more of a ninja about his kills and was a lot more sneaky, which is not what I expect from these movies. And used traps too, which is interesting. Um, that's something that like I think the that the remake, really, the Platinum Dunes remake definitely took from this is the almost like
The
I don't know how to like
outdoorsman.
explain. Yeah, yeah, like that he's just kind of like this guy that is able to conspire against people based on very limited resources, but still has the intellect to like figure that out, that kind of a thing. It's interesting.
Yeah, and what's interesting about this movie, going back to it, is this is very much, this is, I think, the only one where Jason's just kind of a guy.
Hmm.
He's just hanging out in the woods, like killing people. He can be hurt. He's scared of things. Uh, I go to the during the final, chase, where he noticeably recoils from the chainsaw. I don't think Jason from like part 6 would give a shit about a chainsaw. He'd be like, "What the fuck?"
Yeah, no, that was interesting because I didn't I didn't really get the sense in this movie that he was there's anything supernatural going on with Jason. I'm sure at some point that'll change. But for this movie, he is a bit more vulnerable, which is interesting. and he's
Yeah,
much more I think practical is a very good way of putting it. Like he, can get hurt, and he kind of needs to rely on like the physical in order to achieve his goals.
yeah, absolutely. So with the mask and him as a character, this is also the only one I can think of where there's two guys playing him because they had to
Oh,
recast I think partway through shooting. And so that bag had to be like taped to the actor's eye around the eye hole. And there's a
oh,
funny
cool.
story about filming where the tape had like fallen off during the final fight. Specifically, the scene where she's supposed to strike him with the axe or with that pickaxe, and so like he couldn't see and got like his fingers crushed by the prop. So they
Oh,
took
geez.
him to the hospital in like full Jason outfit, and he's got like a machete sticking through his shoulder because that was the outfit he was wearing. And the nurses just kind of looked at him like, "What the hell?"
Oh my god, that's quite the tale to tell. Yeah,
Oh, dude, the making of these movies is nuts.
yeah. I love behind the scenes like special features like that. So because I've been going through the Batman movies, and I've been like the Burton Schumacher stuff, and I love seeing the behind the scenes documentaries. So I want to check out more of those for like the movies that we're covering on this channel, and I think that the Friday ones seem very like informative, which is cool.
it should be. It's almost 5 hours long. Uh,
Yeah.
I think
Well,
they're
and I
still on Shutter. I'm not sure.
Oh, that's cool. Because I think I saw like the Psycho one, and that one was pretty like that one was like there was a lot to cover on the one that I had. So I imagine that for the big significant entries in like the slasher genre, horror genre, there'll be a lot of information.
Yeah, the Friday the 13th one and the Nightmare one are really good, and they're also very long.
Yeah, it makes sense. The Halloween one I heard is also pretty informative.
Yeah, I do want to watch that. Our buddy the Day Ghost has mentioned that it's got some interesting information as well as just some funny stuff.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
So before we get to the thing that I think is the biggest improvement in this movie, the other thing I wanted to ask you is because there's certain scenes where they go back to the first person shots of the first movie,
Mhm.
and I wasn't sure if that was needed because we know who the killer is. It's not a mystery like the first.
Well, I think that like the first person shots were just there to like I guess kind of let you know that like Jason's kind of being he's kind of like leering and kind of like preying, I guess, on people. I guess was less of a tactic in filmmaking to um kind of confuse the audience or any I thought of it more as just like a way to communicate that this is a predator. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I didn't have too much of an issue with that.
Okay, cool. So the thing I think is the biggest improvement here is the final.
Hmm.
In fact, I would go as far as to say I think she is one of my favorite final girls in the genre. Um, and it's Ginny, played by Amy Steele.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, not like she's not on the level of someone like Sydney from Scream. I don't think, but I think in
Mhm.
in the '80s slasher specifically, I really like how smart she is, and uh, one of the more clever girls in this genre.
Mhm. Yeah, and I like that they kind of resolve the situation with their kind of resources and brains, which is cool. It's nice to see that.
I love
And
the fact that she dresses up as Jason's mom because she figures out that's his only real weakness. Um,
yeah, well, and that just goes back to the treating Jason more like a real person in this movie. Is that they're thinking about his psychology a lot. which is a very good idea.
Yeah. The only thing that this movie falters at, I think, for me is, and it's a common issue with this franchise, they did not know how to end this movie.
Yeah, because it kind of has like the exact same ending almost as the first one, where there's a jump scare and then you find
It
out what they're
does,
doing.
but it's also a more confusing ending.
Yeah.
So, for anyone who hasn't seen this movie, which I don't know why you haven't yet if you're a horror fan, so Jenny and Paul think that they're safe, that Jason is dead. And then Jason, without the mask, bursts through the window. And then suddenly Jenny wakes up alone in an ambulance, screaming for Paul. We don't know where Paul went. We don't get any answer for that. We don't know how she got away from Jason or what if that was a dream. I don't understand what's happening the last, what, like 10 minutes of this movie?
Yeah. No,
What,
I found that like kind of confusing as well.
okay. Oh, I can't wait for you to see the ending of part 3. It's nuts.
I guess it just keeps escalating the confusion.
Oh, yeah.
Interesting.
Well, Doolittle, I gave the first one a 3, and I think this is a major step up in every way. So I'm gonna be a little generous and give this a 4 out of 5 for what it is. Obviously, none of these are high art, but I would give this movie to someone curious about the slasher, especially its beginnings.
Yeah, I'm gonna give this like a 3.5 out of 5. I feel like that's fair.
Yeah.
Like it's yeah, like it's almost out of 4.
Okay. Are you excited to see Jason finally get the hockey mask next week?
Yeah, I'm gonna be interested in that because you know, so far we haven't gotten that. This is probably the most like development I've seen with like any of these slasher like franchises, where it really is just taking its time figuring itself out.
Yeah. I would say, and I'm quoting Jay from Red Letter Media here. They have him figured out by 4, and then it's perfected by 6.
Okay, that makes total sense.
Well, we are going to call it a night here. Thank you, Doolittle. I'm really enjoying discussing these with you. I've been looking forward to
Yeah.
doing something with these on the channel for a while. Obviously, I'm a very big fan of these movies, and we will
Hmm.
see you guys next time for Friday the 13th, Part 3.
Yeah. See you then.
Good night, everybody.